Hi everyone, and welcome back to Project No Buy. In today's video, we're going to be talking about money, about budgets, and about when it becomes bad to be wealthy. So this is going to be a very incomplete conversation, a very kind of speculative conversation with ideas and questions and little to no answers. So if you're down for that, you can strap in and join me. I've been thinking kind of a lot with the new focus of my no-buy year on the budget about the morality of money and how it does seem to be loaded with all sorts of value connotations and kind of character judgments as well. And I did recently do a video earlier in January about donating 10% of this channel's revenue generated by this community. And maybe that spurred on some more of this kind of thinking about how to balance our giving of money with our spending on non-essentials, and also just kind of balancing our own savings for emergencies and general costs of life, our futures, retirements and etc. And, from a general moral lens, there comes a point, certainly, at the billionaire level, billion with a B, where it becomes gratuitous to have a lot of money specifically. I think it was a Tom Scott video. Maybe I should add it to the list of videos that inspire me in 2025. It was a video where he was demonstrating the difference between a million and a billion using a road trip. So if you were tracking a second, or a millimeter? Yeah, it was a unit of length. So I think he was using the thickness of a $100 note. Again, I'll link the video up here so that you can see what I'm talking about and you don't have to go off of my poor description of it. But he was taking a walk and measuring via the distance the space that it would take to reach $1 million. And so he reached $1 million in a short walk. And to get to $1 billion, it took a hour-long road trip, hour-plus road trip. I think he reached the ocean. And that was the point where the comparison between $1 million and $1 billion kind of made more sense to me. And so it goes without question, at least in my mind, that an individual with net worth of $1 billion, personal net worth, right? I'm not entirely sure about how it works with businesses as far as ownership and if that's attributed to net worth and etc. This is not so much of, like I said, I'm not getting into the nitty-gritty of the conversation. This is just a speculation and ideas focused video. But anyway, when individuals have a net worth of multi-billions of dollars, and whether it's companies or not, it's maybe easy to see that level as possibly immoral or problematic, or depending on what they're actually doing with that money, with that net worth, and kind of what good is happening in the world as a result of all of that wealth accumulation. But when you take it down, from the billions to the millions even, and even below that to, people similar to me, I'm guessing, who are not even close to $1 million in net worth at the moment, and may or may not reach that in their lifetimes, it becomes a muddier water. You've seen people like me and people online, influencers, whether they're wealthy or not, you see people like me spend gratuitous amounts of money on things they don't need, right? I admit it. I will put my hand up and say I've spent a lot of money on things I don't need. Both in this past year, I had a $3,700 ticket for things that I really didn't need to buy during a year that was supposed to be a no-buy year. And prior to that, it would have been much higher. And the things would have been considered less consciously. So 2024 was the year of becoming a more conscious consumer. That was the former title of this channel. And this year, the real goal is the Project No Buy. And so in the goal of not buying stuff, the thoughts about money, I guess, have crept up to the surface because in the efforts to not buy, I have given my money the action of going somewhere else, right? Many sources say that action is what creates real change, not thinking. And that is one of the weaknesses with my no-buy of last year, is that involved a lot of thinking, a lot of planning, a lot of reflecting, but less replacement action items were happening. And so this year is the year of action, I guess, where instead of thinking about why I want things and why I buy things and all of the above, I'll still be doing that, but in tandem with that, I will also be acting by moving my money to somewhere where it can't actually be used to make purchases and prioritizing that over all else, or over most other aspects of the no-buy, and doing more kind of activities that show the things that I desire or the reasons I want them in a different light. So the things like the wardrobe experiments, tracking with actual data, my wardrobe and makeup and beauty product use, doing more reading and reflecting on the books. I consider reading an action, even if it's kind of more of a thought-related or thought-acquiring action. But anyway, I'm probably going to come back to that in other videos this year. Let's get back to the topic of money and morality. So anyway, there's a level of wealth that it does look to be creeping onto those edges of being immoral, if not outright immoral. I'm not here to make the judgment call today, but there's also an element of being in my position or in a position more similar to myself, of not having that high of a net worth, not having a ridiculously, it's hard to say what's ridiculous, not having an extremely high income, that the morality sometimes works against me. I'll bring it back to the personal for this, because I do have times that I do feel somewhat absolved from wanting the things I want and buying the things I buy. And in some ways making these bad purchase decisions or kind of not wise purchase decisions because I can't truly afford it, because I'm not a billionaire or a millionaire. And in some cases, I almost feel a sense of righteousness for doing these financially less responsible things, like buying $400 to $500 jeans. It almost makes it feel paradoxically justifiable to do things like that because I'm not in a demographic where that means nothing to me, if that makes sense. Let me know if you relate to this feeling at all, where it's like, hey, I should be able to have the nice thing too, even though I'm not in the class of people for whom that makes sense to their budgets. And then on another kind of angle of that, it does seem like there's a point of pretension, point of being pretentious for both high and low income earners. So the high income manifestation of this pretentiousness comes in being totally out of touch with what would be reasonable for a normal consumer and making possibly recommendations that are outright offensive because they're just unaware of what everyday life looks like for people earning less. And in the lower income realm, maybe this pretension comes from conscious hipsterism or conscious rejection of things that are more expensive or more trendy or more popular, partly because of the inability to afford it. Aggressively hipster is what I've noted here, kind of, or almost the sour grapes phenomenon where we can't have some of these things, so therefore they're stupid. I and some of my friends actually, we might be falling for this mindset because, I think I've shared this before, but we've had some colleagues, and again, heaven forbid they stumble upon this particular video on this channel, but we've had some colleagues that recently acquired Tesla cars, and they probably acquired them secondhand, not used, but my and my friend's knee-jerk reaction to this was, oh, Teslas are stupid, like that's a ridiculous purchase. And there are multiple facets for this, right? But there also may be an element of, well, we can't really afford that, so therefore those things are stupid to have, right? So this is kind of what I'm talking about as far as the point of pretension in any category of income earning, right? Maybe pretension is not the right word for it. Maybe it's like some form of judgment, I guess, some form of morality judgment, no less. The saying, the fool and their money are easily parted, is another one that I've seen come up in the beginning of the new year. And, I think it's well-intentioned, but I also do think it's a morality judgment that I don't enjoy. I don't think it's fair to label somebody as a fool in a general sense, because they may have different priorities for their money, or they may have they may have been susceptible to the workings of so many people out there trying to get that money away from them. So there are so many people out there, many people who actually say these sayings, use these sayings, right? The fool and their money are easily parted. Some of these people will have a financial course that you can go buy and therefore be a fool parting with your money to line their pockets using their kind of passive income stream. So, it rubs me the wrong way sometimes to hear these phrases in our society of modern day influencing. It's almost like these influencers are able to make a career out of influencing because there are so many fools out there willing to be parted with their money. And that's just really not a nice kind of customer to server dynamic. Or what is the influencer if not the server? If you're the one selling the product and you think your customers are fools, like that's just not very nice, is it? And then from the other side of that, should I keep my money and save my money only because I don't want to be a fool? Or should I actually have better reasons than that? I don't want to be motivated to become more financially smart because I don't want to be a fool. Like, that just doesn't seem to make sense as well. So I'm abolishing that saying here on my channel. I'm just, okay, I'm being nitpicky with it today, but I just, classic overthinking. Don't like that saying. It could also be an emperor's new clothes situation where I'm a fool if I reveal that I've spent my money. And everybody can see that I'm a fool if I reveal this by spending it on designer goods with the logos where they can see where my money is gone. But if I actually put that money where it can provide real security, like in a bank account or retirement, that's invisible to people and nobody will know that I'm not a fool. So maybe it's the opposite of the emperor's new clothes, where everyone can see he's a fool, but nobody would know if he's not a fool if he didn't wear the suit, the invisible suit in the story. Anyway, these kind of financial thoughts and musings drove me to actually look at what the average income was in the place that I live, which is America, and kind of maybe form a better parameter for when we reach these kind of morality thresholds of possibly having too much money, dare I say. And again, this is all to be treated lightly. I'm not trying to make accusations or real value judgments here. This is just an exploration of different kind of perceptions of what's enough money to survive. So I did note the actual stats for the state that I live in. And so apparently for somebody who's single with no kids, a livable annual income would be $32,718. And a family with 2 kids would be $90,064. So those are kind of the livable annual incomes for my state, apparently, on World Population Review. The annual minimum is $21,840. Minimum hourly is $10.50. And I did also copy a pie chart from Statista with the percentage distribution of household income in the US. So this is in 2023. And I guess the largest categories, according to this, of household income are 17% of households in the US earn between $100,000 to $149,999, and 15.7% are between $50,000 to $75,000 or $74,999. The next largest is $75,000 to $99,999, 12.1, and 10.3 are between $35,000 to $49,999. So I guess that's the majority, the big majority, between $35,000 to $150,000 of annual income. And I guess honestly what surprised me is that so much of the population, according to these statistics, is as high as it is. I guess overall, if we're looking at over $100,000, we have about 42% of American households are earning over $100,000, which was actually much more than I thought. And I guess that would leave about 60% earning less. And then under the $35,000 mark, we have about 21%. So again, I'm not making any judgments based on this data. I'm just kind of sharing my own personal responses to that. And obviously, according to the state incomes, right, it's radically different for whether you're a family with kids versus a single individual, which makes sense. And I guess my personal reflection to this that, hopefully doesn't bite me in the backside for sharing on the internet is that, looking at this distribution of income, I used to think that we were actually on the high end. And again, I shared my surprise that so much of the American population is apparently over the $100,000 annual mark. And I used to think that we were earning a lot of money. And factoring in now that we are a family and we have 3, sometimes 5 kids, perhaps our household income is actually not that great, or at least much more in line with maybe what normal would be than I initially thought. And this doesn't change anything, right? This doesn't change anything in terms of what I practically am going to do. I'm not going to fall prey to hustle culture and pursue income at all costs. Like, that's not something that I think I could do if I wanted to. It would be very difficult. So in a practical sense, nothing is going to change. I'm not going to be pursuing more income for the sake of it. I'm not going to suddenly think I should have more because some statistic says that maybe to be living an average life, I should have more. But I guess what it has done is that, I'm not at a level where I personally feel bad for making as much money as we do. And I wouldn't necessarily say that I was there before, because it certainly never felt like we had excess money after paying for all of our expenses, right? The things that you buy on a no-buy year, even the housing, the groceries, the necessary transportation for work. And, there's not a whole lot of things that many people can cut out right now, aside from the spending on non-essentials. It's really difficult to lower a grocery budget right now or a housing budget right now. And so those fixed costs really impact what level is kind of the gratuitous amounts of money threshold. I saw this other image that kind of also made me mildly uncomfortable, stating what the averages actually are. There's this graphic that was based on a survey of 2,203 US adults in 2024 about what financial success looks like and minimum net worths versus annual salaries, and the actual average versus what different generations think one needs to be successful. So I'll pop that up here. What does financial success look like for Americans? And, I do think that some of this is in the realms of ridiculous, but I did think it was kind of interesting to ponder, to think about. So I am a millennial, and I guess we are in the second lowest category as far as what the generations think you need to be secure, be successful. So first you have boomers, 1946 to 64. Who think that $100,000 of annual income is financial success and a net worth of $1 million. And, this is the older generation. Then we have Gen X, 65 to 80, who think that $5.3 million is the net worth you need and an income of $212,000 annually. And millennials are a little more, what I would say, reasonable, but maybe that's just my own perspective coloring it, of 181 annual income plus a net worth of 5.6 million. And Gen Z has rocketed up, and their concept of a minimum annual salary is $588,000 and 9.5 minimum net worth, which, why? Why has this happened? Are they, is it from anxiety or is it from status seeking, is I guess the questions that I would love to know more answers to. The actual average is $64,000 and 1.1 net worth. So the net worth is actually on par with what boomers think is financial success, but the average income is still far below any of these kind of success metrics. So I guess that does explain why most people are unhappy with their money and maybe don't feel like they have enough or never feel like they'll have enough. I did also watch a video from Caitlin Pawlowski on the social media circus. I'll link it up here if I can. This was last year, so it was a while ago, and I still remember it. There were these girls on a podcast talking about how if a guy makes $200,000 a year, is that enough money for you? And the girl was saying, no, I want him to make that much in a month. He has to make more than I do. $200,000 a year is okay for my hardworking dad, but in this day and age, making money is so easy. To me, that's so morally weird. Like, if you're making that much money in a month, like, there's only so much time in a month. There's only so much effort that can be put in to generating income in a month. So I just have to conclude that to make over $200,000 in a month, or even over $100,000 or $50,000, like, the threshold is not $200,000 in my mind, but there has to be exploitation somewhere down the line. Even in high-paying kind of regular jobs, I feel like there's still often exploitation, working for many of the bigger companies in the US with higher salaries, in the $100,000 a year mark, probably involves significant exploitation. Although how personally responsible you are, I think, does correlate to that number rising. So if you're in the making $200,000 a month category, I would hypothesize that you're responsible personally for more exploitation. And I just feel morally really weird about that. And then there's also the thoughts of effective altruism, I guess, where in theory, you could go do the work to make that $200,000 a month. And if you donated $100,000 every month to some kind of world charity, maybe the good that does outweighs the bad or the exploitation, or, taking advantage of the system in order to give back. I don't know. I still have to read Peter Singer's work to understand this more fully, so I'm probably taking this wildly out of context. I would love to hear your takes in the comments from those of you who are more familiar with this material than I am. Didn't finish my thought there. I meant to say that despite the ideas of effective altruism, I'm still not comfortable with the idea of exploitative high levels of income like this. It also kind of makes me think of the 4-hour work week, which I read when I was an undergrad, and I was still kind of young and naive and on that train of how do I make life personally easy for myself and advantageous and, just out of ignorance, really. And, is this possible for me to create these passive sources of income and work 4 hours a week? And I was reading this and I was like, oh, so you basically use outsourcing of labor to people that you can pay less than you would pay yourself, or pay somebody who lives in the same kind of region of the world as you. And like, something about that just seems weird and like something I would not want to get involved in. And I just, it feels like some kind of exploitation or gaming the system unfairly, even if there are some good things about it, and even if I'm never going to understand the full nuances of something like that. I mean, at the end of the day, it's all a spectrum, right? There's always going to be someone making less than you, always going to be someone making more than you. You can put yourself in an affluent neighborhood and feel really poor, or put yourself in a poor neighborhood and feel really rich, which is something that did happen to me at the end of last year when I was making a trip to the post office. I shared about it in one of my videos, how I got kind of a reality check about how relatively rich I am now compared to even how I've been in earlier phases of my own life, let alone other people. But anyway, I do feel like there's something in the fact that our relationship to these feelings, to how we relate to the feelings of not earning enough or earning maybe more than is morally comfortable, can relate to our buying patterns and how we think about wanting things and buying things and justifying it, how we justify it. Do we deserve it? Do we not deserve it? I do have a video coming later, maybe next month, about how everyone deserves it. So that's not a good justification. Everyone deserves it. Everyone doesn't deserve it. I will get there later. Okay, to close out this video, I did want to share kind of my budget prototype for somebody. I guess, this would be the version of me who is single without kids. And I guess according to these statistics, I would be pretty in line with my state's minimum or livable annual income for somebody who's single without kids. So I made this fake budget on My Money, the My Money app, and I will go through that with you now. So my fake budget totals are working with an income of $3,130 per month, which is probably more than I actually earn. And the reason for it being higher than what it strictly needs to be is that I do want to send $500 a month both to my Roth IRA and to savings. So that's $1,000 of that would be savings. And if I multiply this by 12, it would be $37,560, which is almost certainly more than I actually earned last year. I actually don't know yet with the newness of the YouTube annual revenue. I would guess what I actually earned is maybe somewhere in the low 30,000s, but lower than 37, but higher than 30. We'll see. For now, I'm just going to use these metrics, and they're hypothetical. So if I were trying to aggressively save, then it's possible, if I were single in this fantasy land where I was single with no kids, that I could find cheaper housing. But I did want to make it kind of realistic. So operating on that kind of over budget of $37,560, I have, hypothetically in January, housing costs of $1,000, food costs of $600. Again, I optimistically set this at $100 a week, but have been reminded time and time again that groceries are just not that cheap anymore. And it's also hard because I do groceries as a large family. And so to take one person's portion of that is, is it going to be half of it? Is it going to be a fourth of it? It's just kind of hard to do. So I've left that at $600 for food in general. Phone bill I've put at $50 to kind of take a portion of what we actually pay, which is higher than that in reality. And again, this is not even on strict percentages either. I didn't just take 50% of everything, since not everything is a 50% kind of expense in our house. For transportation, I put $80, assuming that I would keep my car, which is paid off, and that would just be gas. Bills, again, taking a percentage of the utilities, I just allocated $100. Insurance, I have $50 for health and auto and etc. This is probably low, but again, my husband is a military veteran, so we do get TRICARE insurance, which is a lot cheaper. And so I don't actually know what they would take out of my paychecks if I had to get it through work. So this is probably radically low for health and car insurance. Taxes, I put $50 as far as putting $50 aside every month for taxes, which again might be too low if all of my income was in theory to be self-employed, which most of it is not. So I don't know that I would need to put more aside for taxes in a practical sense. Here we get to savings. Ideally, I'd be putting $500 a month in a Roth and $500 to emergencies. And I guess in theory, once the emergency fund was fully funded, that $500 could go then to vacations or to some other kind of long-term fund. And then here we get to my no-buy categories. So I split this up, and this is kind of arbitrary since I put 100 of it into shopping. So that would cover anything like replacements and the gifts, of which I kind of give myself categorical exceptions for birthday and Christmas, along with kind of suggested amounts and items. In my overall no-buy plan, I mean, not in this budget. If you've seen the videos, you might already know what I'm talking about. I will link them up here. And then social would cover restaurants that are not a family meal. And again, in this hypothetical single-person budget, I guess this is where the restaurants would come in. So $100 for grabbing coffee with friends or getting an occasional meal out. And so the non-negotiables of this budget, the life expenses, the home, food, phone, car, bills, insurance, and taxes amount to $1,930. And the kind of more flexible ones, which I don't want to treat savings as flexible this year, but in terms of practical necessity, right? If we literally don't have the money to feed ourselves or pay utilities, then we're probably not going to be able to put the $500 either in our Roth or in our savings account. So that's what I mean here. But the $1,930 is like the mandatory life expenses, and the $1,000 in savings is the next kind of priority. And then the $200 for non-essentials is kind of at the bottom. And so this is my hypothetical budget here. And while I understand that this may be varying degrees of helpful, since this isn't my actual financial reality, as far as, the budget that I've drafted is not even necessarily perfectly correspondent to what I actually make. We'll see. But this was kind of helpful for me, at least, in determining what is reasonable for my actual budgets. And again, like if I were in dire straits, I would go rent a room in a house for ideally less than $1,000 a month. I would hope that there are still kind of shared housing situations with rents that are under $1,000. I know there are some studio apartments downtown that are maybe in the $700 to $800 range still where I live. So there are cheaper ways to live. I used to live in shared houses as a student, so I know it can be done. And hopefully things haven't changed that much since I left college, although prices have skyrocketed for everything else, so you never know. But anyway, all that to say that I did find it helpful to kind of separate my own income level and expense levels to reframe what I think it's reasonable to be wanting and buying as far as maybe the price levels of things. And yes, I have had higher salaries in the past. Actually, my highest paid year was as a public school teacher, and that was a salary of almost $70,000. And I think it ended up being slightly more than that with the bonuses for the years 2020 to 2021, the teaching bonuses. And that, I don't want to say that that was the kickoff of my overspending problem, but it definitely contributed to the feeling of being able to buy nicer things. Most of my nicer clothing pieces were acquired during that time. It was also the most strict dress code that I had. We were recommended to wear either blouses or collared shirts for female teachers and not jeans. So that's when I acquired most of my non-jean trousers. And it did kind of give me the false sense that I could spend $100 to $200 on each item of clothing without kind of facing real consequences for that or feeling like it was above my pay grade, so to speak. And, maybe the remnants of that kind of feeling is what led me to think it was acceptable to want and ultimately follow through in buying $400 to $500 jeans. So I'm still kind of processing how my relationship to money and salaries and expenses is relevant to my no-buy efforts, and that's why I'm making this video. That's why I made this hypothetical budget. And I don't know, if you have a family and work with your expenses the same way, if you share your income, all the household income and expenses and do it all together, and you've found yourself struggling with the no-buy because there's expenses that you can't really control, or other people in your household, your husband or partner or wife or whatever, is spending in a certain way and you don't want to fall into their traps. I don't know, it did help me to have it separate like this. My husband does earn more income than I do, and it's not necessarily that I think because he earns more, he should get to spend more, but there is an element of him having to spend more time chasing the income to support our family, and therefore me feeling more kind of morally okay with me pursuing the art of less, or pursuit of less, pursuit of wanting and buying less, while he doesn't necessarily have to focus on that as much since he's spending more time focused on other things. Okay, and with that, I would love to hear if you have any more budget breakthroughs on your end in your pursuits to want and buy less in 2025. And I will close this video out and see you in the next one. Bye for now.